So today's teach-in is titled International Union Solidarity, Labor Rights in Palestine. Jared Sachs is going to be moderating this discussion. Jared Sachs is a South African PhD candidate in the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies. He's the founder of a nonprofit children's organization and has worked as a freelance journalist and political commentator. He's also been a longtime supporter of Students for Justice in Palestine and is a member of the South African organization Jewish Voices for a Just Peace. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jared, who will then introduce Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I want to send my digital greetings from Azania, which is the country currently known as South Africa. Here in South Africa, there's a long history of solidarity between Black South African workers and Palestinian workers, both of whom have struggled for decades against colonialism, racism, and exploitation. In South Africa, we support the struggle of the Palestinians because we also know what it is like to live under a racist apartheid government. I've been a proud member of Student Workers of Columbia for almost 6 years now, which is kind of distressing to say out loud because I need to hurry up and graduate already. But let me not distract you with my personal problems at the picket line. So today, we are here to talk about labor rights in Palestine. Our guest is for this teach-in is Rachel Papirmeister, a 3-year undergraduate majoring in cognitive science. Rachel is a member of Columbia University Apartheid Divest, which is comprised of 2 organizations that work together to support the struggle in Palestine. The first is Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, and the second is Jewish Voices for Peace, JVP. I will hand over to Rachel shortly, but first, I want to give you a quick overview of the way the struggle in Palestine intersects directly with labor struggles in the United States. For decades, labor unions in the United States have been controlled by a cabal of careerist bureaucrats whose politics can be described simply as corporatist. This union strategy aims at building a strong mutually beneficial relationship between the union, primarily its leadership, and the employers. The corporate-style union was always depoliticized in the sense that it discouraged member engagement in any subject matter beyond traditional wage bargaining. One of the most taboo subjects for these unions has always been solidarity with Palestine. At the same time, these unions remained highly political by maintaining a strong and highly questionable relationship with the Democratic Party's electoral machine. Over the past decade, this has begun to change. New reform and member-led movements have infected local unions across the country, challenging the decades of dominance of union bureaucrats. Insurgent and wildcat strikes have spread across the country, most notably the massive teachers' strike that took place a few years ago in West Virginia. But there have been many other teacher strikes as well. There's the recent John Deere strike and a few others, where workers have bucked the union bureaucrat line and often rejecting agreements and things like that. Within United Auto Workers, rank and file movements like Unite All Workers for Democracy, UAWD, as well as Academic Workers for Democratic Union, AWDU, are offering direct challenges to the corporatist administrative caucus, which has been in control of UAW for 70 years. With workers fighting to take back their unions, it is no coincidence that solidarity with Palestine is suddenly being placed directly on the agenda of many union locals. Unlike union bureaucrats who do not want to rock the boat with their friends in the Democratic Party establishment, rank and file union members have always had a natural inclination towards connecting their experiences of exploitation and oppression with that of others. If, as we say in the labor movement, an injury to one is an injury to all, then surely the struggle against colonization of Palestine, one of the last remaining apartheid regimes, must be a key site of labor solidarity. I would argue that it's fair to say that Palestine has actually become the litmus test for progressive politics in the United States. You are not progressive in general unless you are also progressive on the issue of Palestine. Any rank and file labor movement worth its salt must support the struggle of the Palestinians and the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. Likewise, challenging union bureaucratic leaders on the issue of Palestine will in turn help clarify who we can trust in our own struggles for a bottom-up democratic and fighting union. Any union leader afraid of taking a public stance in support of the Palestinians is a leader who we must assume will cave to the employer's threats and cut backroom deals in order to maintain their cozy relationship with the bosses. All struggles intersect. So let us begin to find one another, work with each other, and build a new world together. As we say in South Africa, a luta continua. I will now turn to Rachel, who will begin her presentation.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yes, cool. Okay, awesome. All right. So hi, as Jared introduced me, I'm Rachel. I organize with SJP and CUAD here at Columbia. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. That's just a little Instagram graphic. Yeah, so this is going to be about labor rights in Palestine. You can just go to the next one. So I'm going to take you first through like an attempted brief history. It's a lot of history and actually left out quite a bit, but there's been a very long struggle for labor rights in Palestine. And it started with Histadrut, which is the Federation of the Jewish Labor in Palestine. It was established in 1920, and it prohibited Palestinians from working on Jewish settlements or factories. And it promoted settler colonialism pertaining specifically to labor. They wanted Israeli settlers to work, but it came with discriminatory policies targeted at Palestinians. Their official mantra was the Judaization of labor, is what they called it. And then in 1925, Palestinian Arab Workers Society was established in response to these discriminatory labor practices. And pause, although it's actually, I think, PAWS, organized for the protection of Palestinians and against the immigration of Jewish settlers. Most notably, they promoted education of labor rights. They established branches in various Palestinian cities and opposed a railway company that discriminated against and refused to hire Palestinian workers. So then in 1930, on January 11th, they had their first official workers' conference. And in 1935, hundreds of Palestinian workers employed by the Iraq Company in Haifa struck for higher wages. And then in 1936, that strike, which is another strike, the Palestinian General Strike against Zionist settlers and British colonial rule, which lasted 6 months, is one of the longest, it remains one of the longest in world history. During this time, Britain governed Palestine because of a mandate by the League of Nations. And then in 1937, Britain's Peel Commission plan was met with a lot of resistance and guerrilla activism, and eventually it worked, the activism worked, and the deal was rejected. And lastly, for this little section is the Great Palestinian Revolt, which lasted for 3 years and demanded the establishment of a national Palestinian government and a ban on Jewish colonization. And then the pictures I have here, the one on the top right, yeah, that one, that's actually like a propaganda poster for Histadrut, and then so is that below. And then the picture on the bottom left is an actual photograph from the Great Palestinian Revolt of 1936. I feel like it's always good to put a face with the context. So, you know, like these are real people we're talking about. This is real history. It's not just, I don't know, it's not like hearsay. It's not abstract. Like this really happened. And it's important to talk about. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so in 1942, Palestinian labor movement was weakened and dispersed. The Federation of Arab Trade Unions and Labor Societies, or FATULs, was founded as a rival. There was a lot of factionalism during this time. And in 1945, the UN partition resolution caused another rift in the labor movement. It called for the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states and designated Jerusalem as a corpus separatum, or a separate entity with special governance. This obviously caused more problems for the labor movement. They were trying to organize and their borders were literally being ripped apart. And in 1947 to 1949, the start of al-Nakba contributed to further disintegration of the Palestinian labor movement. And these photos here are all actual photos from the Nakba. So you can go to the next slide. All right, so from the Nakba until 1974, the trade union presence in Palestine suffered a serious period of stagnation and decline. In 1950, political annexation of the West Bank to Jordan was declared. The labor movement, Palestinian labor movement, joined forces with the Jordanian labor movement, but there wasn't a large Jordanian union presence, which made it very difficult for the Palestinian labor movement to organize because they were kind of combined with them at this time. And in 1953, laws for the establishment of trade unions were enacted in Jordan, but once again, it wasn't really, it was underneath another union. Like, there wasn't an official Palestinian union at this point. In 1954, the first two branches of the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions, which we'll talk about a lot later, were founded in Jerusalem. And later, in 1965, the Nablus branch is founded. But still at this time, it's marked by a lot of factionalism and political division. In 1964, also the PLO was founded, not to be confused with the Palestinian Authority, which we'll go over later. But after the occupation began in 1965, the Palestinian labor movement established itself as a public institution that advocates for independence and addresses the oppression of Palestinians imposed by the Israeli regime. And this picture over here is, that's actually from the establishment of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And then here's the original, sorry, I'm realizing you have your mouse. That's the original logo. And then they have switched their logo recently to this one. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this. Okay, so this is where a lot of turmoil arises, obviously. So it's weakened and dispersed, the labor movement, the Federation of Arab Trade Unions and Labor Societies. Wait, I'm looking at the previous slide. Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm looking at the previous slide. Okay, the West Bank and Gaza Strip fell under Israeli occupation, also known as the Nakba, which caused a lot of economic hardship. Israel decreed to freeze all union activities, which proved to be a very serious barrier for demonstrators and for organizers. Several attempts were made to revive the Nablus branch of the Federation, which is kind of the nickname for the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Union. So I'm going to call it that from this point on. And in 1967, following the Six-Day War, by the way, this is also known as Nakba Day, but the first official meeting of the PGFTU, or the Federation, took place on January 10th, and Zakaria Hamdan was elected as its Secretary General, but he was arrested and deported 3 months later. So even though they had a meeting, there's still not a lot of just concreteness in their organizing at this point, just because they can't. You can go to the next slide, sorry. Okay. In 1972, in an expression of Palestinian nationalism, Palestinian workers declared their independence from the Jordanian Federation of Trade Unions officially. And in 1974 to 1981, this was marked by a period of serious advancement in which labor movements expanded and several previously suspended unions were revived, which I mentioned in the last slide. In 1976, thousands of Palestinian workers went on strike to protest the 1975 Galilee Development Plan, which confiscated about 2,000 acres of privately owned Palestinian land and allocated them for the construction of Jewish development towns like Carmiel and 50 smaller Jewish settlements. And then on March 30th, 1976, Israeli security forces actually killed 6 unarmed Palestinian demonstrators and wounded 100 other Palestinian demonstrators. So this was in response to the Land Day general strike. And this poster on the right is actually a poster from the strike, an original poster. And these are both pictures from the strike. This is communist leader Tawfiq Ziad, and he did speak at that. You can go to the next one. Okay. So again, it's like this up and down, like ebb and flow going on throughout the history we've covered so far. So again, the movement begins to waver and disintegrate due to more factionalism and political dimension. The first Intifada began, which further weakened the Federation, and it definitely exacerbated it. All trade union blocs agreed to unite in the labor movement inside Palestine, and then came the Oslo Accords. You can go to the next slide. So the Oslo Accords resulted in the, Aman Agreement, which ultimately continued to oppress Palestinian workers. So the agreement was signed between Israel and Jordan, unifying trade union efforts within the framework of the Federation. However, it was immediately followed by, in the same year, the Protocol on Economic Relations, or the Paris Protocol of 1994, which forcibly imposed the use of Israeli currency in occupied territories, gave de facto control of Palestinian imports and exports, reinforced Palestine's economic dependence on Israel's occupying power. And I mean, the one part of that that's not terrible is it established the PA, but I mean, yeah. You also may know the Aman Agreement by another name, the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty. That's what it's called in most moderate circles. And then in 2000, 2005, during the second Intifada, restrictions on Palestinian workers again strengthened. And this is something I actually think about quite a lot because of the implementation of checkpoints. Those pose a serious health risk, especially during COVID-19. And that's still prominent today, obviously, but many Palestinians are forced to work in settlements or Israeli cities because of financial need. And it's not just a hassle, or it's not just extra travel, like it's actually unsafe and it's violent and you can die. So yeah, I think about that a lot, and its origins. And you can go to the next slide. So the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions still exists. They safeguard and advocate for the rights of workers, and they, according to the Palestinian labor law, number 7 of 2000, which they implemented, they lead a process of supporting working class in a struggle for ratification. They organize, and most recently, something they were involved with was the general strike this year that actually costed Israel $40 million. So when they organize together, they are very effective. Yeah, and that's the goal, is effective organizing. Oh, this is a picture actually from that protest, but continue. Woo. Oh, I also want to say they're democratic and independent in a, yeah, that's in their bylaws, basically. Okay, current state of Palestinian labor rights. There are a lot of bureaucratic obstacles like zoning policies, discriminatory permit requirements. There is an 82% unemployment rate in Gaza, and that actually increased by 17% just during the pandemic. You may remember the mishandling of vaccine distribution because, as I've previously said, the imports and exports are all de facto controlled by Israel. And that definitely contribute to it. There are currently 12, as of 2021, there are 12 labor inspectors in Gaza for all the people that work there, which is just unfathomable. There's regular demolitions of Palestinian property, like we've seen in Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah. There's, this I thought was quite interesting. In Area C of the West Bank, which covers more than 60% of the West Bank, the land, oops, someone's coming in, is allocated, oh, it's covered, but 1% is what it says. I'm sorry, it's covered, but 1% of the land is covered, is allocated for Palestinian infrastructure. And then further suppression of activism and labor rights in general. Ooh, someone has their, I'm gonna mute you. Okay. Further suppression of activism and just free speech and labor rights would include the Ministry of Defense labeling Palestinian human rights activists as terrorists, or recently bombing the media tower in Gaza. These are all things that disrupt labor rights and the movement for labor rights. Well, I do have more to say. And since 2017, approximately 6,400 Palestinian Authority civil servants have been forced to retire early. They still work, but they actually only receive 50% of their pay. And that is drawn against their pensions. Yeah. And this little graphic here is actually from 2020. So you'll see that it really, like, in 1 year just went up so much. But prior to the pandemic, so 2 years ago, it was 65% unemployment. Okay, you can go to the next one now. Oh, I'm sorry, go back, I apologize. Go back one, if it's possible. Okay, one more thing. Palestinian landowners that grow olive trees have, in a recent report, have started to receive permits that limit access to their own land for 40 days per year, the entire year, just 40 days. Yeah, okay, now you can continue. Okay, violations of child labor rights. So according to Palestinian and Israeli law, the legal age for employment is 15 years minimum. But according to a 2016 report, which I only imagine has gone up, 65,000 Palestinian children ages 5 to 14 were being employed. So this will sometimes be on Israeli settlement farms in occupied West Bank, or it will be working fishing boats, street vending. It's a little more, it's not as clear cut in Gaza because the unemployment is so dire. But a lot of times, I mean, all the time, these children that are working because they need to, because their family can't afford money or can't afford to not have them earn money. So specifically for the Israeli settlement farms, work days can last up to 12 hours. They're forced to work in hazardous conditions where they could get injured, and they're not provided health care, and they're also paid less than Israeli minimum wage and without contracts. And that is interestingly kind of similar to what's been going on with the strike here at Columbia. I mean, to a very different degree, but yeah. And also that picture on the right is in Gaza, a boy sewing a fishing net, and on the left is also in Gaza. Oh, all of these statistics, by the way, are from the Human Rights Watch, which is why I have that thing here. Yeah, you can go to the next slide now. Okay, so there's been a lot of historical solidarity with Palestinian laborers just internationally. So I wanted to give a few like very specific notable examples. So the first one is in 1969, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which is based in Detroit, basically advocated for the Palestinian struggle and said it championed it as a part of a worldwide resistance to oppression. In 1973, there was the auto workers in Detroit that held a wildcat strike to protest the UAW's purchase of $300,000 in Israeli bonds. And that was 3,000 Arab auto workers. And that was pretty powerful. In 2002, April of 2002, excuse me, New York City Labor Against War called for an end to US military aid to Israel, Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza, and support for the Palestinian right to return. In December in 2004, this is another like solidarity statement, but this organization in New York, Al-Auda, the Palestinian Right to Return Coalition, and the New York City Labor Against the War jointly founded Labor for Palestine, which is still currently active. They're a really cool organization. It's a cross-union network, and they are endorsed by thousands of trades unionists. You can go to the next one. Yeah. Oh, wait, you skipped that one. Nope. Perfect. Okay, so in June 2010, the West Coast Dockers of Longshore and Warehouse Union in California refused to unload cargo from Zim Lines. Zim Lines is Israel's leading maritime shipping company. And I'll come back to that in a minute because it is important. But then in August 2014, again, the same group of dockers refused to unload more cargo from another Zim Line ship. And this reflects a long ILWU tradition of refusing to handle cargo. They've also, this same union, or the same two unions, have not unloaded cargo from ships from Nazi Germany, Italy, Chile, South Africa, and US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that particular union, those particular unions have been very, I guess, very dedicated to Palestinian liberation, which I appreciate. You may remember that I mentioned Histablut earlier in this presentation. So Zim Lines, Israel's leading cargo maritime shipping company, was actually established by Histablut in 1945 when dock workers refused to unload these Zim ships. It also represents a broader act of resistance due to the Zim Line's historical placement within the context of oppression. So I really appreciate that. In 2019, allied Lebanese and Palestinian demonstrators in Lebanon protested work permit restrictions after the forced closure of 2 Palestinian businesses. Also, by the way, this picture is a Zim ship. I don't know if it's ZIM or Zim. I've never heard anyone say it. So I'm going to say Zim. That sounds, I don't know, easier. And in May 2021, South African and Italian dock workers refused to unload Israeli ships following Palestinian trade unions' call for solidarity. And then in May 2021, Palestinian workers called for international solidarity, and they were met with unprecedented response all across the US. There is a movement called Block the Vote, which has to do with Zim Lines and Zim Line ships, and their longest strike or refusal lasted 2 months, that they striked and that they would not unload the ships. You can go to the next one. So what can we do? So yeah, SJP and JVP, all in his CUAD, I'm sorry, that's a lot, Columbia University Apartheid Divest. In the fall, students voted in favor with 61% to pass the divestment referendum, and Barnard students in fall 2018 voted in favor 64%. So this is this is a big brunt of the work that SJP and CUAD and JVP does. So yeah, I encourage you all to just also, there should be a little something in BDS about here, or in here about BDS, but another way that you can help on an individual basis is adhering to BDS guidelines and not supporting Israeli products or Israeli businesses. Yeah. And if you want to be involved with future organizing, we have our email down here. We have the JVP email and the SJP email. It's very cohesive, I feel like. We're also a non-hierarchical organization, which I really like. It's, yeah. I don't think I have anything else to say. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
No, thank you, Rachel. Could you just explain quickly for people who don't know what BDS is?
Yes, yeah. So BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, basically advocates for boycotting of Israeli businesses and, excuse me, it's like an economic boycott in a sense. These are some references we have. This was very well researched. Yeah, I'm gonna pass that off to Adam if he has more to talk about BDS, who is also another member of CUAD here with me today. Wherever he went.
Hello, am I coming through fine?
Oh, I hear you. I don't see.
Okay. I've been having technical difficulties all day, but
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that.
yeah, it's whatever. Zoom is Zoom, but I don't know if the link went through, but I just put a link for the
I saw the link. Yeah. So
.net in
the
chat.
current, the most recent BDS statement, it says a call from Palestine unite against cyber surveillance and repression. That I remember I was just reading an article about that yesterday, and the face recognition used by the IOF, if anyone else read about that recently. So yeah, I encourage you all to try to adhere to BDS and look into it. It is very important. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I'm a little nervous. There's a lot of people here. Oh my gosh.
You're doing great, Rachel. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with us.
But yeah, we can open for questions. Oh, there's more people coming in here. Oh, thank you. Yeah, SJP is and CUAD is a really, really cool student organization. I really like you all in there, if there's anyone else besides Adam in there. But if you're interested in learning more about like us specifically as a campus organization, you can reach out to our Instagram. And then we also have an email list, and we have if you really want to get involved with organizing, we have a Slack, and that's how we generally communicate. But yeah. Does anyone have like any presentation questions?
I'll come in because I think, thank you for your presentation, Rachel. I think it was very important and very important for us to understand what kind of labor organizing is happening elsewhere in the world. One thing that we can also do as student workers of Columbia is put together our own referendum in support of the struggle in Palestine and in support of BDS. Our sister organization at NYU put together a referendum about, I think, 5 years ago, and it was quite powerful to see it as a form of solidarity, but it also put NYU on the back foot in terms of this issue. So we could follow up CUAD's own referendum that they put forward 2 years ago with our own one. And I think that could be quite powerful as a union if we did that.
I agree. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions or about the presentation or about BDS or about anything related to Palestine that we can engage with or answer?
I don't know what happened while I cut out earlier. I just wanted to like clarify, at least with BDS, that I feel, just in case I wasn't too clear, it's like a multifaceted campaign. It's like the website's super clear about it, and it's basically set up that regardless of like who you are, like what organization you work with, there are different ways to get involved. So this would be clearly the D in BDS, like the divestment, getting the university to divest directly from like war profiteering or apartheid, and that's what our coalition has been focused on. And with regards to referendums, as well, just to like push forward the message that these referendums have already passed, and they need to like respond to the democratic will of the student body. They can't just like, we don't have to keep passing referendum after referendum after referendum for them to finally listen. They just have to listen. Yeah.
Sophia, raising your hand.
Yes, I have a quick question actually. So I was on a leave of absence after the Barnard referendum passed. So actually, I'm not sure, did the administration either, on Columbia side or Barnard side ever give, an official response to this referendum, or did they just kind of ignore it?
Rachel or Adam, do you want to answer that?
I'm gonna pass that off to Adam because, as I told you, I'm a transfer student, so I'm not entirely sure.
Sure. So the day before, I don't know how all this is coordinated, but the election results were released simultaneously with the statement from Presbo, from Bollinger, basically saying, we hear you, but we're not listening to you. And this vote has no meaning over anything, but we support the right to talk more about it. Just don't do anything about it, which was very, very, I mean, it's a very Presbo thing to say.
Freedom of speech. It's like the little band-aid he puts on it.
Yeah, just to add in and clarify, there were actually two referendums. There was the Barnard referendum that you were referring to, and then there was the Columbia student referendum that happened a couple years after that. Both of them passed overwhelmingly, and in both cases, the university presidents ignored the referendums. And the same has happened in most other places, most other universities as well. But at some point, these kinds of referendums can show so much popular support that it could shift things and force the university to act.
I also I want to bring this up. I could have dedicated like a couple slides to it, but there was so much information. Didn't want to overwhelm you all, but I guess Israel has officially adopted this as their ideology, what they call labor Zionism. And I mean, it's a little, I don't know, it doesn't really align with most the ideologies of like most labor movements, because it's predicated on oppression. But I do encourage you all to look into it, and you can see that it's a little backwards. Yeah, I would have dedicated like several slides to that. It's fascinating and weird and wrong. So yeah, most of, especially with like Histadlut, that's all about promoting labor Zionism. Yeah, I wish I got to mention that, and I neglected that point.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any other thoughts to add or anything they would like to share?
I have a quick,
Cool.
I have a
yeah.
quick question. Sorry, just a general question. If you could drop, like, what are the best ways to support, get involved? Like, are there specific places we should go, or just things we should know?
Yeah. So okay. Well, one is like Adam said, BDS is a multifaceted campaign. So there are many different things you can do that fall under that. But additionally, and this is not affiliated with CUAD. I do have to say that it's not affiliated with CUAD, but a lot of really good work happens with mutual aid. So yeah, if you can find, if you can just like, I can give you my email or something, or like, but there's a lot of really, really good mutual aid campaigns that go on, especially in New York City, that I think that's the most direct way to make a difference. Absolutely. Especially with the terrible unemployment in Gaza. I know that one particular mutual aid fund organizes food baskets to send out, I think like once a month or something, or once a month or maybe twice a month. Absolutely, definitely. If you if you want to get involved, put your email in the chat, definitely. But I would say BDS, mutual aid, although that's not affiliated with the university or our organization in any way, just do have to say that. And you can join us if you would like to get more involved.
Could you put your email in the chat, Rachel? Just in
I
case
can
people
put
want
mine.
to
Yes,
contact you.
I can do that. Should I put my regular email or my Columbia email? What should I?
Whichever makes sense for you, for which you prefer for people contacting you to get involved, that sort of stuff.
All right, I'm gonna put my regular email, I guess.
Rachel and Adam, if we organize a SWC referendum on BDS, would CUAD be willing to co-sponsor it and support us throughout the referendum in making sure that everyone is well informed about the issue?
So we would have to like talk separately about that, just because we would have to see like what the rest of the membership thinks on it, because it's like a democratic organization. But I mean, on a personal level, it sounds definitely something I'd be interested in. But yeah, we'll have to follow up on that.
Well, we could follow up, but I think people would probably be okay with it. But yeah, we can't like promise that.
Well, it looks like something that would be great to organize next semester. Once our strike is over, we have an awesome contract and we have more time on our hands. I guess we're coming to the end of the session. Hey, so maybe I'll hand it back to Sophia and Andre.
Yeah, sure. So unless anyone has any questions, you can type stack in the chat if you want to ask any last minute questions. But I see, the crowd has been participating a lot in dropping links into the chat. So please, everyone, open up your chat and look at the links that people have posted in there. There have been some great resources. I'm actually going to copy paste the references that Rachel included in her PowerPoint. So Andre, I'm going to hand it off to you as I do that, in case you want to make any other announcement.
Sure, thanks, Sophia. I just wanted to thank Rachel, Adam, and Jared for this teaching. I think it's really important stuff, and really want to thank you all for the work y'all are doing and the solidarity. Otherwise, anybody who's here, I wanted to just bump the rest of the Picket activities happening today. There's the in-person picket line at the Morningside campus going until 2 p.m. And then there's an RA walkout, I believe, start at 2 p.m. where folks are then meeting at the Sundial on campus, and there'll be music, sort of fun rally to sort of end this week of the strike. And so for those of you who don't know or haven't seen the emails just yet, we have voted to continue the strike. So the strike will continue into next week. So I encourage you all to come to more teach-ins that will be happening, come to the digital picket line. If possible, come to the in-person picket line. If you're in New York, encourage folks to do the same. And one last thing, Sophia, while you're dropping stuff in the chat, I got a few questions about folks who maybe missed a little bit of the start of Rachel's presentation and wanted to see the recording. Where will they be able to find that afterwards, if possible?
Yeah, so I have been recording to the cloud, so the UAW Zoom account should actually have this uploaded, I think, within a day. And then I'm going to try to post it to the YouTube channel, but before I do that, I'm going to send out the link. I mean, participants can certainly review the video before we go ahead and greenlight it to be uploaded to YouTube. So so I'll be sending out the link as soon as we have it.
Is there a link to the YouTube channel itself, Sophia? If there are other videos that people could see?
Yeah, so we're working on getting the most recent teach-ins uploaded to YouTube. We're just trying to figure out who has access to that YouTube account. If not, I'll just upload it to my own account. But we do have the GWC, so Student Workers of Columbia, formerly known as Graduate Workers of Columbia. We do have a YouTube channel there where we have uploaded all of our teach-ins from our last strike, which was last semester. So I will put that in the chat in case you are interested in looking at that. I did have one more announcement though. Andre, I don't know, can you find the YouTube channel for GWC? But I had one more announcement to make, which is that we are planning a teach-in with Just Vision's film productions. They actually just released a documentary this year on these anti-boycott laws in the US that were designed actually to fight against basically any individuals or organizations supporting the BDS movement. So we are going to be organizing a teach-in around that. The date is currently to be determined, but as soon as we have those details pinned down.
It's been quiet all morning.
Someone needs to mute, Andre, if you could.
I got it. Yeah, I cannot locate the GWC link, Sophia.
Okay, let me do that, and I'll post.
Maybe a bit,
that,
maybe a bit dense here.
Yeah, sure.